Friends, before we read our lesson from the gospel today, I want to take a moment, as I sometimes do, to set some context for us. Last week, in our readings from last week and our readings from next week, we are going to specifically hear talk of, quote, the Jews. In our reading this morning, we're going to encounter Jesus saying the words, "All who came before me are thieves and bandits." The Gospel of John has been used throughout the centuries by Christians to reinforce anti-Semitic beliefs and attitudes, because if we're being honest, the Gospel of John engages in a little bit of theological gaslighting about who is who. All throughout the Gospels, we get this title, the Jews, and they are painted as the bad guys. And so I want us to remember the context that we learned about last week. The entire Jewish people were scared, and those who were following the historic Jewish religion were expressing their fears by telling these people following this new expression of the religion, these Christians, that they were cut off from God. And what we find in a lot of the Gospel of John is the Christians firing back. Matthew, Mark, and Luke often name the Pharisees and the temple leaders as the antagonists. It's worth noting that those books were written before the siege of Jerusalem, before the destruction of the temple, but the community of John does seem to widen the blame to the whole of the Jewish people. It's not only unfair, but it fails to remember that everybody in the story was a Jew. Jesus was a Jew. They were Jews. So think about it like this. Have you ever said something really mean to somebody because you were hurt and angry by something that maybe they had said or done to you, and you lashed out at them, and then you came to regret it later? I think that that's what's happening here. The community of John, these new Christians, were angry and they were lashing out. So the upshot is, it's fair to critique individual characters of the story, absolutely, but it is unfair and it is inaccurate to blame Jewishness for what happened to Jesus and his followers. As always, if you'd like to talk more about that, please contact the office. Let's set a time to have coffee or lunch. Happy to do so. Happy to talk to you about this. All right, now let's turn our attention to a portion of our reading from the 10th chapter of John. Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate but climbs in by another way is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him. The sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. And so again, Jesus said, "Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and will go out and will find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In the Gospel of John, we find a very common pattern for a lot of the events that we read about. Biblical scholars refer to it as miracle, dialogue, discourse. Jesus does something amazing, miracle. Everybody talks about it, tries to figure it out, dialogue. And then Jesus tells everybody, thanks be to God, how they should be thinking and understanding in light of the things of the miracle that have occurred, the discourse. Today's reading, as you can surmise, is that last part. This is the discourse part of that pattern. Now, the miracle was that a blind man was healed, a beggar, in fact. And it was one of those very tactile, very visceral situations. Jesus bent over and he spit on the ground, and he took the dirt and the spit and made mud with it and put it on the blind man's eyes. He coated the beggar's eyes, and then he told him, "Go and wash it off." And when the man washed it off, he could see. And that's when the questions started flying. Actually, the first question came before any of the miracle even occurred. When the blind man came upon Jesus and the disciples asked Jesus why this guy was blind. Did he sin or did his parents sin? And that's what caused him to be blind. You're going to notice there's a lot of talk about sin today. People are very concerned with sin. What is it? Who's doing it? What's the effect? Lots of sin talk today, so buckle up, right? People are ostensibly, but the first people to bring it up are ostensibly the people who should know better, right? The disciples. They're the ones who hang out with Jesus all the time. Well, the guy's healed, and then people start to recognize him wandering around town, it seems, and they ask, how could he possibly have received his sight after being born blind? And he says, it was a guy named Jesus. Now, they were keen to figure out what had happened, and so the people brought in the big guns. They brought in the Pharisees. Dun, dun, dun. And the first thing that the Pharisees do is they learn that Jesus performed this miracle on the Sabbath. Yeah, for the Pharisees, that is a no-no. You don't do things on a Sabbath. So some of the Pharisees said, well, clearly he's not from God, right? He doesn't keep Sabbath. And some of the others were saying, well, how could a sinner perform a miracle like that? Again, notice, lots of talk about sin. So they asked the blind man, what do you think? And the blind man says, I think he's a man of God. I think he's a prophet. Now, at this point in the story, the Pharisees were experiencing what a lot of psychologists call cognitive dissonance. They had lived their entire lives with a very firm understanding of how they believed the world worked, who people were, how people were supposed to be and act, and all the rules that they believed functioned a governing society. And yet standing right in front of them was a living, breathing contradiction to everything they thought they knew and understood. There is a man who is supposed to be blind, clearly because somebody's a sinner, supposed to be blind, and he's claiming he got healed by somebody on the Sabbath. Danger, Will Robinson, right? Does not compute. Somebody has to be lying here. That's how the Pharisees worked through their cognitive dissonance. So they go talk to the parents. Is this your son? Yeah, that's our son. How is it that he can see now? We don't know. He was blind from the moment that he was born. But here's the thing, he's a big boy, he's an adult, he can talk for himself. Why don't you go ask him? And so they went back to the former blind man, but this time they don't ask questions. No, this time instead, they do that thing that unscrupulous people do when they want to get away with something underhanded or questionable. So they try to hide their tracks in the way they're talking to make you think that they're acting reasonably. In our story today, the Pharisees just look at the blind man and they say, we know he's a sinner. And maybe they give a little wink, right? Give a little wink to get him on their side. Again, there's sin talk. And the former blind man is not catching whatever they're throwing out. And he says, look, I don't know if he's a sinner. All I know, I was blind, now I can see. That's it. And the Pharisees were like, yeah, but how? And he says, I've already told you the story. Why are you asking me again? Do you want to be his disciples? And that's when the Pharisees lost it. They said, we don't want to be his disciples. We don't even know where this guy came from. And the former blind guy says, yes, and that's what I don't get. You don't know who he is, but he healed me. We all know that God doesn't listen to sinners, and yet there has never been before in the history of the world someone like me who was born blind and who got their sight. If he were not from God, he could not have done that. And the Pharisees said, what do you know? You were born into sin. More sin talk. And they drove him away, the Bible says. Jesus wasn't going to let that go. He finds him, he accepts him, and he tells him, standing right in front of the Pharisees, it's okay, brother. Some people are just born blind and can't see what's right in front of their face, pun intended. Pharisees are incredulous. Are you talking about us? Today's reading is Jesus talking about them, talking directly to them. And notice he's invoking our reading that Catherine read to us from Ezekiel 34. He's invoking this idea of sheep and shepherds. In the Middle East, to this day, the way that a shepherd interacts with their sheep is distinctly different than the way that a Western shepherd will interact with sheep. There are two distinctive things about a Middle Eastern shepherd, and both of them are named here in the reading. First, the shepherd directs the sheep with the voice. Much in the same way our trained dogs will come to us when we call their names, a shepherd could enter a sheepfold that had multiple flocks, and they could literally call each of their sheep by name, and the sheep would come. It's not metaphor what John is saying here. Secondly, for a shepherd to call themselves the sheep gate, that would not have been an odd thing for them to hear. It was often the practice of shepherds to sleep in the opening of the sheepfold, making sure that nothing got in or nothing got out, including the sheep. So in light of the story of this blind man, in light of all this sin talk, what is Jesus doing with these sheep metaphors? I think Jesus is doing two things. One, I think he's making a positive statement about the nature of care and comfort. The reason the sheep listen to the shepherd, the reason the sheep trust the shepherd is because they know that the shepherd cares for them. As I told the kids, in the words of the 23rd Psalm, the shepherd makes them lie down in green pastures, leads them beside the still waters, restores their soul. Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, unless you are striving to bring comfort and care, you're no better than a thief and a bandit. In fact, you are a thief and a bandit. And it seems like these Pharisees were eager to label anybody and everybody a sinner. And what they meant by that was, you don't follow the religious rules that we tell you you need to follow. The Pharisees were not interested in celebrating someone who was blind and who now could see. They just wanted to find out which dirty sinner did the deed on the Sabbath. They were more concerned about rules than relationships. The idea of the sheep listening to a shepherd is an important one, I think, for the church to hear. If the church is not speaking and acting out of comfort and care, the sheep will not listen. The sheep will not listen. They will not hear us. If we're running around telling everybody that they're no good, dirty sinners because they don't do their faith or their life the way that we think they should, then we are no more to them than thieves and bandits. Secondly, I think Jesus is making a negative statement against those who would harm these sheep. He is very clearly saying that thieves come to the sheepfold to steal, only to steal and kill and destroy. He says, I'm here that you may have life and have it abundantly. I'm here for their welfare. You're here to harm them. I'm the gate. If you want to get to them, you got to go through me. The world is full of people like the Pharisees in John's gospel. People who are so caught up in the way that they've always done things or always understood things that they don't know what to do when healing is standing right in front of them. They don't know what to do when authenticity is standing right in front of them. They don't know what to do when freedom and empowerment are standing right in front of them. And the Pharisees of this day still try to do what the Pharisees of Jesus' day did. When they don't understand something or when they don't like something, they try to stamp it out. They try to drive it away. In a bit, we're going to recite together a portion of one of our theological statements of faith. We're going to remind ourselves that in the words of the Confession of 1967, the church has no business excluding, dominating, or patronizing fellow humans, and further, we should resist those who do. We get to exist to help all people live the abundant life. We are called to stand in the gap against the thieves and the bandits and tell them, we are the gate. If you want to get to them, you have to go through us. You are trying to steal and kill and destroy. We are here that they may have life and have it abundantly. We are the gate. If you want them, you've got to go through us first. Friends, there are people all over this world who need to know that they are loved and cared for. There are people all over this world who need to know that someone is standing in the gate, in the opening, to keep the thieves and bandits away. Jesus says, I am the sheep gate. We too are called to be the sheep gate, to protect the flock and to ensure that all can live life and live it abundantly. Amen. Thanks be to God.